Will you pray with me? Gracious and holy God, it is a joy and an honor to be amongst friends in this space this morning. God, as we worship together, as we cultivate opportunities to know you more deeply, may this be a moment in which we feel and we follow the direction of your Spirit. And may the words of my heart and the meditation and intentions be pleasing to you. Oh God. Amen. Friends, it is good to be with you all this morning. My name is Josh Esparza, and I have had the joy of getting to know most of you over the past several months. I was reappointed in July here into this congregation, and it has been quite a gift. It's been a gift to know you all. It has been a gift to receive your hospitality, to be in the presence of this wonderful choir and orchestra. It is a gift to hear about the ways in which you so deeply believe this church matters because of what you have experienced, because of what your children have experienced, and even for some of you, what your grandchildren have or are experiencing now in this church. And as I've gotten to know some of you all, and we've had meals, and we've sat outside Missions Cafe and talked over coffee, I've gotten to know just the passion that you all have for your church. And I've gotten to know really the inside scoop, right? Like, what are the things to know about Allen? So a couple of weeks ago, I discovered Max's is hopping on Sunday morning. Right? I go up to pick up the donuts from Missions Cafe, and there's a line out the door, and that is to pay. And I have to wait in this line just to pick up the donuts. That's not even to place your order, right? I've learned that the shed, I call it the infamous shed where we keep all our storage, because I have successfully not gone to that part of our church yet. It is where all the storage happens. It is where all the good things happen. And often it is talked about in a way where Alan's like, yeah, the shed. And I'm like, yeah, the shed. And I've really gotten to enjoy just the opportunity to connect with you all and go to the homecoming football game at Allen. Like, that was my first Allen football game probably over a decade. And so the hospitality and the warmth that you all have shared has been palatable. It's been humbling. But more importantly, as we have had these conversations, I've asked the question to many of you, how would you describe our church? Or what would our community, what would residents in Allen and Collin counties, what would they have to say about our church? And it's not too dissimilar from the question that Jesus asked his disciples, in which he says, "Who do you say that I am?" Now, I'm not claiming to be Jesus here. Let's make that really clear. But there is this opportunity to hear and to witness how people perceive and experience our church, our people. And for us, I've heard that we are a serving church. We are a church that takes seriously the needs of our neighbors. We are a church that wants to engage in the immediacy that is present. We are a church that has created so many opportunities, that has birthed nonprofits, that has created opportunities and environments to engage with the community because we so deeply believe in the work of the church. Because we have been radically and drastically changed by the love and grace of God, that we believe all people should be called into this space. That we believe we have something to offer that other people have something to gain. To experience the grace and love of God. To know that there is nothing a person could ever do that separates them from the love of God, and that God's grace is abundant and sufficient for all. And so we've moved in this space to do this work together. And as we transition into our text this morning, I can't help but think about the narrative arc that the Gospel of John is setting up for us this morning. We're in John chapter 6, but before we get into the weeds of that a little bit more, we remember that the Gospel of John is focused on the Christology of Jesus, that there is a high Christology of Jesus, that no matter what happens throughout the Gospel, there is known that Jesus is 100% God. There's no question about the divinity of God. There's no question that Jesus has come to fulfill the promises that God has made throughout the Hebrew Bible. And then we enter into chapter 6, and we see the feeding of the 5,000. And that's present in all four Gospels. That's present in the Synoptic Gospels. That's present in the Gospel of John. There's something significant here. The spoiler, all the Gospels don't have all the same stories. But the feeding of the 5,000 is in each one. And as we read through chapter 6, we see that there is an intention here, as we're talking about the feeding, to talk about the Passover that is to come. It's within proximity of time. And so we see in this feeding that it is a reminder that Passover, it was an opportunity, was a story, was a promise in which God delivers the people of Israel from Egypt. That God's provision is consistent and holy. And we see in this story again that God's provision is present. That God sustains the people who have gathered. And so, as we get into this story, I've said it a couple of times, we've read it a couple of times, but what happens in this story? Jesus feeds how many people? 5,000. Okay, I see. You're awake. You're listening. I'm checking. Yeah, we're good. There were some bright eyes like, oh, he just asked us a question. It's okay. We're tracking. You all know the story left and right. So Jesus feeds 5,000. And what does Jesus use to feed the 5,000? Fish and loaves. That's right. Very good. A+, gold star. You're killing it. And what we see here is that there is a mass here. There's a mass of people approaching the mountain. Jesus multiplies this bread, multiplies the fish. But what's interesting here is that Jesus could have fed these people however he wanted. Jesus could have turned stones into bread, right? We see in another gospel account when Jesus is fasting and in the wilderness, and there's this exchange happening between the devil and Jesus. The devil says, why don't you just turn these stones into bread since you're so famished, since you're so hungry? There's an awareness of Jesus' divinity, of Jesus' ability. Jesus could have done that. We read in the Hebrew Bible that there is manna that is wholly provided for the people of Israel, and they're wandering so they may not starve, so they have sustenance, so they have something to survive on. Manna could have come again. But what does Jesus do instead? Jesus, he sees them approaching, and then he says to Philip in verse 5, where are we to buy this bread for people to eat? And then we see in verse 6, it says, and he said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. And Philip answers, and he's like, Jesus, have you looked around? Like, there is no way we could feed all these people. 200 denarii, 6 months of wages. There is no way we could feed enough where people could be full, let alone like just a little crumb. There's no way. And I think what's interesting here is that we see in the text that Jesus knew how Philip would respond, but I'm curious on if there was an opportunity here for Philip. That Jesus was providing an opportunity for Philip to look beyond the immediacy, to engage in some creative imagination and begin to wonder and believe, how might God show up for these people? Far beyond just the 5,000 who are hungry, who need something to eat. And so then Andrew comes in and says, there's a boy with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And so Jesus gives thanks for the loaves and the fish. He blesses them, and they multiply, and they eat plentiful. And they eat so much that they have extras. They have 12 baskets full of leftovers. Is that the miracle? Jesus uses the gifts of the people. We see that in this text. That for us, and it's brought in, our attention is focused on the need. Our attention is focused on the 5,000 who have nothing to eat and the inability to do that. John is creating tension here. It's good authorship. It's good narrative. There's this problem, and it's being teased out. And it's saying there are 5,000 people here. How are we to resolve this? But what if we read this story from the perspective of who Jesus sought help from? We know that Jesus could have done anything to sustain these people. But instead, he chooses to use what a community member has. Jesus goes to this boy, and there's this exchange of bread and fish for it to be multiplied. And rather than just miraculously providing, Jesus takes what is amongst the people and blesses it for all people. And perhaps even more significant, or just as, we see that there is a boy willing to give his loaves and fishes to be multiplied. Now for this boy, I imagine this is all he had to give. He sees a crowd, and I imagine Andrew being like, hey, can we have this bread and fish? And he's like, sure, here you go. What's mine is yours. And I begin to wonder, what are our fishes and loaves? What do we have to give that gets multiplied through the work of the Spirit and the work of our churches that goes and changes people in ways we could never fathom or imagine, but it happens because of God's holiness and the ways the Spirit moves within us? Is that the miracle? Jesus distributes this bread himself. He goes and he gives an extravagance of abundance enough for all present to eat and then some. And Jesus is demonstrating God's divine love and connection of all people. And we see in chapter 6 that Jesus doesn't just see the needs of the people. Jesus sees an opportunity. So what if we follow the example set by Jesus in the story? That maybe we change our perspective a little bit so that we must be intentional in the ways we show up and connect with other people. And to kind of bring this concretely, give it some legs a little bit, there's these theories, these conversations about guesting and hosting. And if you're a part of the Good Neighbor experiment our church has been a part of, they've talked about it some there, but it's developed around all these other community engagement opportunities and theories. And to be a guest and to be a host are two drastically different things. And traditionally we hear that churches are really good at being hosts. Churches are really good at setting the table. Churches are really good at creating missional opportunities. Churches are really good at creating ESL programs. Churches are really good at creating after-school programs, education, missions, all these things. Churches are great at that, and they're needed, and they're valid. Our church does an exceptional job in that, and it's beautiful. And what if we could add another layer to that? See, to be a guest means we don't have all the answers. To be a guest means we are a little vulnerable. To be a guest means we have to ask more questions and bring answers. To be a guest means we're maybe even a little exposed or uncomfortable. And maybe when we are guests, we have the opportunity to learn and discover new things that we wouldn't as a host. And that's hard work to do. Let me be really clear on that. It feels counterintuitive. It feels like not something we're called to do naturally. Back in the day when I was partnering with an elementary school, I engaged with this elementary school to really immerse myself in the community. I wanted to get to know our people, get to know our neighbors, get to hear and feel the rhythms of the place in which we were doing ministry together with. And in that time, I was volunteering weekly with the librarian. Any librarians in here? No. Well, here's the secret. We got one. I love it. Here's the secret about the librarians. They know everything. They know all the dynamics. They know which administrators to befriend and which ones to not step on toes. They know parents. They know kids. They have quite the feel for what's happening here. So I'm volunteering weekly with them. I'm getting to know the librarian, the assistant principal, the community liaison. I'm doing all this work to get to know our community. And naturally, when you show up a couple times, like, hey, you want to be a part of our site-based decision-making committee? I was like, I don't know what that is, but tell me more. And they're like, well, it's like a PTA, but it's different, et cetera, et cetera. So absolutely, I agree to it. They said, great, you joined? You're the chair. I was like, awesome. I didn't know. You just told me what this was, but okay. Like we're rocking and rolling here. So I'm the chair of this site-based decision-making. It doesn't mean a whole lot other than I take notes and whatnot. But here's what was important. This group was made of myself, a couple other community leaders who spoke English, who didn't really speak great Spanish, and then a bunch of Latina moms who spoke Spanish either as their primary language or as their only language. And so oftentimes when we had our meetings monthly, the community liaison would translate back and forth, English to Spanish, English to Spanish. And one meeting I show up and it's just me and all the Latina moms. And I was like, okay, like it's gonna be a different meeting today, but that's okay. So we begin the community liaison, she starts translating, she's doing English, Spanish, English, Spanish. And as she's doing this about 10 minutes in, I ask the community liaison, don't worry about me, just do it in Spanish. I'm the only one who speaks English here. You're doing this just literally for me, and the reality is this isn't for me, this is for us. So go ahead and lead it in Spanish, and I'll be honest with you, my Spanish is okay. It's not great, it's conversational, I can hold my own, but there's a lot I don't know. And so we dig in, and she's doing it in Spanish, and she's checking up on me, and she's like, Josh, you got it? I'm like, I got it. She's talking, Josh, you got it? I got it. Guys, I don't got it. Like, I didn't know what she was saying. I missed some things. And here's the problem. I lied. And I lied because I didn't want to sound stupid. I lied because I didn't want to sound inferior. I was anxious. I was insecure. And about halfway through the meeting, I decided I needed to ask for help. I needed to stop her, ask her to repeat it again. I needed her to clarify. I needed her to define words I didn't know super well. And it was really a humbling experience because afterwards I began to think about these Latina moms and the ways that this is their lived reality every day. That they live in Dallas, they're in this space, and Spanish is their primary language. Maybe they can speak English, but they struggle, they're concerned, they're self-conscious, they're anxious, and this is the way they navigate their entire lives. Now, this was uncomfortable for me for an hour. And it made me really wonder, how are we embodying the experiences of our people? What don't we know until we position ourselves in places where we don't have the answers, or we can't make all the calls, or we have to admit we don't know, and that make us feel a little vulnerable. This sermon series, Having Nothing, Possessing Everything, is significant because Mike Mathers, the author of this, who's a United Methodist pastor, this was based when he was in Indianapolis, he invites us into these kind of stories. But the only way his churches begin to change the way they connect and empower people is to experience their lived realities, is to enter into the places in which they are gifted and called to, and to find that there is abundance and opportunity here. That there is a gap present when we come in and just believe that we can fix everything without truly knowing who our people are. This series pushes us and invites us to just do some minor things. It invites us to tweak, to reframe, and maybe reprioritize how we define and engage with our community, but especially the poor. It pushes us to cultivate an awareness of our own gifts in our community, and it challenges our understanding of the poor and why or how people experience poverty. So if you want this book, it is available in Missions Cafe. Adam did a great job making sure it was here in time for our series together. I invite you to pick up a copy and to dig through it. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your questions. And I'd love to take you to coffee so that we can go and talk and dream and imagine in creative and new ways in which we connect with one another. There's a quote I want to leave you with this morning. Neighbors who used the gifts of other neighbors began to see the abundance that was both around them and within themselves. Also, when people outside the neighborhood went inside the neighborhood and hired someone to cook a meal or bought a piece of art or got their nails done, they began to see ostensibly needy people as artists, economists, chefs, musicians, and entrepreneurs. Friends, when we serve our community, we do great work. I want you to hear me say that again. This is not a diminishment of that. But coming from the churches, coming from the nonprofit space, I know the pull that we feel to highlight the difference that people experience, the numbers in which we've done, and they help us quantify impact. And those things are important. Those things draw people in. Those things validate how we financially support these things. These are things that we put on reports for grants. I understand the significance of that. And I think what we do in that is beautiful and holy. This series is an opportunity for us to say, what if we add something to the puzzle? What if we looked at the way we did community engagement more through a kaleidoscope instead of a telescope and see that there's something different that can be experienced and done? The ministry of Jesus and the themes from this book help give us a starting point to expand who we are and how we engage our people. Friends, wouldn't it be a miracle if our communities felt as empowered as they are helped? May it be so. Amen.